Hello friends, welcome to Edwiki Learning channel. Please do subscribe to get more updates on the DevOps concepts. This video is part of the full course AWS DevOps Practitioner training. Please do check the description below to get the link for the complete full course. Without further delay, let's get into the video. Thank you. Welcome back team, and let's continue our discussion. Right, let me see the current status in my EKS cluster. kubectl get pods. So I can see that the Jenkins is now running, and if I go to the K9s and let me look for the Jenkins and let me get into the shell. Right, if I shell into the Jenkins pod and if I do a df-h, here you can see that where Jenkins underscore home is the directory that is mounted on a volume, and that the size of the volume is 20 GB, right? That's how it is. So that means what? It is actually storing the data on the external volume. That is what I wanted to confirm it, right? That is from the pod side. We have seen the configuration in the last lecture, right? Where we can create a PV and then the PVC, and you mentioned that which PVC has to be get mounted it into which directory inside the pod. Then it takes care of doing all the stuff for you. You don't need to do anything, right? Now, if I come back to the Jenkins, right? So this is the brand new Jenkins now, having the volume also attached, right? So let me try to get the initial password to unlock the Jenkins and configure the Jenkins for our specific, use cases. I'm interested to create a pipeline. Let me try to get the initial admin password from here. Well, so let me install the suggested plugins. So I have some steps that are documented in the README file, and I'm planning to go over with these steps now, right? So I think by now at least my Jenkins master is done. Correct? The Jenkins master is completely up and running at this time. Good. I don't want to create any Jenkins user for now. Let me skip it and continue as admin. And this is my URL to connect to the Jenkins. Save and finish. Start using Jenkins. This is the Jenkins UI. Looks good. Now let me go to the planning, guys. So the step number 1 is done. Preparing your Jenkins master related manifest files and other things. The step number 3 also done. That is where I deployed the Jenkins. Probably I'll change the order here just to make it more easy. Sorry. So I prepared the Jenkins master, then I deployed the Jenkins master, correct? So this is the step number 2 is also done. Now the step number 3, let me prepare the Jenkins slave image. That means which image that it has to use to create a slave pod automatically, correct? So I need to create a image for that. So for that, let me pull up the Docker file that I have handy in order to create a Docker image that the master can use later to create a slave, right? So let me pull up that. I think it is there in my local as well. So here I can see a Jenkins agent build. So in the Jenkins agent build folder, I have the Docker file here, guys. You can look through the Docker file. We already familiar how to write a Docker file, and this Docker file is very straightforward. So I'm just taking the Amazon Linux to AMI, right? And if you look at this Docker file, I'm actually planning to install the required packages that would be needed on my slave pod to execute my steps, right? At a high level, you see that I'm actually installing the Git, wget, tar, ggib, and I'm installing the Docker, and I'm installing the, I'm setting up the Java path, right? The Maven, right? And you see, I'm installing the Node software as well because I can use this image to run my, the Node builds as well, right? And here are the steps, right, to install the Node, right? I'm downloading the Node software and I'm extracting the Node software and I'm, downloading the JDK and I'm setting up the JDK. So pretty much at a high level, right? I'm just installing all the required packages, right, as part of this Docker file, correct? So usually if you are doing it in normal EC2 instances, you will be running all these commands one by one, right? The same thing, I'm just putting it into the Docker file, right? And I can see the Helm also being installed here and the push artifact plugin also installed here, correct? Now, if we look into this Docker file, guys, right? I'm taking the Amazon Linux image as a base. A question for you at this time. Do you think the Amazon Linux image has any service that is running continuously? No, right? In general, if you take Amazon Linux as a base OS, right? If you create a container using this base OS in general, it won't run for longer time, right? Because there is no service running inside it. So if I use this image as a base and you configure all of these, right? So at the time of me creating the image, sorry, at the time of me running the container using this image, right? Since it does not have any services up and running, so it will just execute the commands, whatever the task that you given, then simply the container, or I meant to say the pod, will be get terminated. That's how it works. You don't need to explicitly call out that, hey, you need to terminate a pod because the steps are completed, not required. It take care of that. Okay. Anyway, this is the Docker file. I need to run a, we can just run a docker build command to create this Docker image, correct? So in my local, I don't have a Docker, right? I don't have Docker in my local machine, so definitely I cannot run a Docker build command to create this image, right? So we need to run this in any one of the temporary server where you have the Docker is available, correct? So I think for now, this image, this Docker file is already executed in our previous discussions, and the image is available in my Docker Hub registry. I can just go and start using the same image rather building it again, because we already familiar, right, how to build that image and publishing to our registries. So let me go and see the image that is available in my Docker Hub registry. There should be a one. Let me search for Jenkins agent. I just need the latest one. So the 4 months ago this. Okay, so this is the image that I wanted to use in order to in order to run my slave pod. This image is created using the Docker file that I have been gone through here. Okay, looks good. So let me take that image name and let me put it into my documentation. So I would say creating the image, this is done. And the image name that I'm going to use is this one. It's just for my documentation purpose. Are we good with this? Now, so I need to set up the Jenkins. So as part of the Jenkins setup, the first thing is I need to install the plugins that would be needed. These plugins will help us to interact with the different tool sets, right? How do you know that which plugin that you need to use, correct? So in general, you are expecting the Jenkins to be integrated with Sonar, Artifactory, Kubernetes, Docker, right? All what you need to do is go and search for the plugin. So the plugins.jenkins.io is the portal where you can see the plugins. There are hundreds of plugins that are available. Out of these plugins, which plugin would be needed for your specific use case? So you need to start searching for the plugin here. Okay. So let's say I wanted to work with the JFrog Artifactory, right? So I wanted to search for JFrog Artifactory. So interesting, I got only one. So you see here there are multiple results that are came in Artifactory, and there is some JFrog and other things. So as usual, like when you are writing the Terraform code, how you go to the Terraform documentation and identify the exact resource type and follow the documentation. When you are writing the Python code, how you go to the Python module documentation, see how it will work and which module will help us. Similarly here, right, you search for the plugins, and whenever you get multiple results like that, right, you open the each and every plugin and go through the plugin documentation. This plugin documentation will help you, or will tell you, right, what kind of the problems that this plugin is solving, or the Jenkins will connect it to which tool using this plugin. If you wanted to use this plugin, what and all different options that you need to fill up in the Jenkins and whatnot. In simply put, how you can use this plugin, and why you need to use this plugin, what problems that this plugin is solving in your Jenkins setup. Everything is documented here, guys. You need to spend some time in going through this plugin documentation to understand how it works and how to use the specific syntaxes in your Jenkins to work with this particular plugin related stuff. Make sense? So if you think that this plugin is not a suitable one for your requirement, right, and you search for the other plugin and read the plugin documentation, see is that the right one for your specific need. Getting me? So that is how we need to put some effort in terms of identifying the right plugin which will be useful for our specific needs. So for example, if I open this plugin, right, the plugin name is Artifactory, and if you see the description of the plugin, it says that this plugin is integrates the Jenkins and Artifactory to publish, resolve, promote, and release the artifacts. Is that the one that I'm looking for, guys? Right? So the Artifactory plugin that I'm using here, right? My requirement is what? I want the Jenkins to work with the JFrog in order to publish the Maven artifact, and in order to download the artifact, right, as part of the build process, correct? And that is the goal that I have, and this plugin will help us to do the same. So once you know that this is the what you are looking for, then go through the plugin documentation and see how you can use this plugin in your setup. Make sense? So now let's say I wanted to work with the I wanted to work with the Docker. So we need to search for Docker, and we got almost 26 number of plugins in the result. We need to go through all of these output or suggested outputs, then read the documentation. Open the plugin documentation, read the plugin description, and if that is what you are looking for, then use it. If not, okay, probably that is not the use case that you have. Go with one more and start reading the documentation. That's how initially you need to search for the right plugin for your specific needs. For example, here if I look into the Docker pipeline plugin, right, it says that the Jenkins plugin, which allows to build, test, and using the Docker images from the Jenkins pipeline project. So this is what I'm looking for. Why? I'm expecting the Docker images has to be built and publishing to the registries, right? And that will be done using this plugin. Once you know that this is the right plugin for your use case, then you need to, go through the documentation and see how to use this and other things. The similar thing has to be repeated for all the different tools that you are using, guys. Are we good with this? Right, and here at least since I already familiar, right, which plugins would be needed, and I'm calling out here. So the Artifactory plugin for JFrog, Sonar Cube for Sonar, Kubernetes for integrating with the Kubernetes, Docker pipeline for integrating with the Docker to do the build and deployment processes. That's how it works. The credentials plugin in order to store the credentials that would be needed. You see in the next step, I'm adding all the credentials, right? To manage the credentials or the passwords, need to have a plugin called credentials. That's how it works, right? So once you know the list of plugins that you wanted to, right? All what you need to do is go to the Jenkins, go to manage Jenkins. In the manage Jenkins, here you can see, yeah, you can see something called plugins. Click on the plugins. If you go to installed plugins tab here, you can see the plugins that are already installed. Remember, as part of the initial launch process, there are certain plugins installed as suggested, right? We can see some plugins are already installed here. So I'm sure the credentials plugins might have been installed by default. You see here the credentials plugin, which is already installed by default because this plugin pretty much needed for most of the projects, right, in order to store the credentials. So this is already done. So I need not to install this plugin again, right? Like that. If you wanted to install a new plugin, then you go to the available plugins tab here and start searching for the plugin that you are looking for. Let's say I wanted to install a plugin called Artifactory, right? Search for the plugin name, select the plugin and click on install. So it takes care of downloading the plugin and installing the plugin for you automatically. Once this plugin is installed, again you go to the available plugins tab. Now search for the Sonar plugin. Let's say a Sonar Cube. The Sonar Cube scanner is the plugin that we are looking here. Select the plugin, install the plugin. Just verify the status. Done. Again, you go back to the available plugins and now you search for, let's say, Docker pipeline plugin. Select the plugin, install the plugin, and let me verify the plugin status. Done. Again, I'll go to the available plugins. Now let me install the Kubernetes plugin. You may see multiple results here: Kubernetes, Kubernetes client API, Kubernetes credentials, so on, so on, so on, so on, right? Definitely you need to spend time in going to each and every plugin documentation to see what kind of the problem that the plugin is solving here and choose the right one. And here, at least in our use case, right, the Kubernetes is a plugin which will be useful, right, to manage your whole cluster deployments. So select the plugin and click on install. If you ask me, will you be doing all of this in real time? Probably no. Why? This is only one-time activity, right? Mostly the very first time when you set up the Jenkins or installing the Jenkins, you need to do this. This is not the repetitive activity, right? So probably you may or may not be getting the opportunity in the real time to do this basic scratch level Jenkins setup, guys. Because it's a one-time job, someone might have been already set up the Jenkins and it's already up and running. We don't need to install the plugins again and again, right? Just to give you some insight. Now, if I go back here and look like I have the plugins that what I wanted to be good. Now let me add the credentials, right? So the Jenkins would need all these credentials in order to do a automated build and deployment processes, right? So first let me add the Bitbucket credentials. So let me copy the password. So all what you need to do is whichever the credentials or the passwords that the Jenkins would need as part of the the pipeline automation process, we need to keep all those passwords in the credentials section, right? You see the credentials here under the manage Jenkins. Go to the credentials and just go to the global credentials. Just click on add credentials. The credential can be added of different types here. You wanted to add a username and password, or you wanted to add a SHS private key, or it is just a single secret text. There are different type of the credentials. So for now, I wanted to add the username and password of my Bitbucket. The username is dpt realtime, and I'm just giving my password. You can give any ID here. The ID in the sense the name that you wanted to give for this credential, so that later whenever you wanted to use these credentials, you can refer this ID name. Whenever you refer this ID name, the Jenkins will fetch this username and password and will be using that right as and when needed. That is how it works. Whatever the operations that I'm doing here, all these operations I'm doing at a Jenkins application level. We should all understand the difference between the application layer and the OS layer, right? Whatever I'm doing here are not done at a OS level. All these are done at a Jenkins level. So is mean that as I see a question in the chart window, can we do all of these at a pod level, right? If you're logging into the pod, that is your operating system, right? So I need to install all of these at a Jenkins level, not at a operating system level. So you need to do it either from the Jenkins UI, or if you wanted to do a command line base, you need to use the Jenkins CLI, which is a pretty not straightforward. So the Jenkins has some command line interface. You need to start learning the Jenkins commands and start running the Jenkins commands. Then it will work. So more or less, you need to integrate or you need to work with the Jenkins only to do this setup, not at a voice level, right? So we will never ever, or at least I haven't used the Jenkins CLI any for any reason, because the UI is enough, because this is not a client facing application and this is the one-time activity more or less, right? So let me give the ID for this secret, and let me give some description to understand what kind of the credentials that it has. It has Bitbucket logins. Click on create. Now, in the same way, I need to start adding all the secrets that the Jenkins would be needed. So I need to add the Sonar token as well, right? So this is the Sonar token. We already familiar how to get the Sonar token, right? So let me take the Sonar token and let me configure it here. The Sonar will not be having any username. It has just a token, right? So then the type of the secret will be secret text, so that it won't ask for the username. You just give only the secret, which is the key. And let's say this is the Sonar ID. These are the Sonar credentials. This ID we will be using later whenever you wanted to use these credentials in your automation. As of now, we are just storing the credentials in the Jenkins, which is a secure, safest method, because once the passwords are saved here, you cannot see them. For example, if you go to the credentials that you added here, you can delete, or you can add a new password here by clicking on change password, but you cannot see the password what was set here, right? So that way it is still secure way to add the credentials in the Jenkins, right? And again, uh, we can create a Jenkins users and can define who can have the delete access, who should not have the delete access on the Jenkins. That way, ideally, right, you guys will never get a access to delete the secrets in the real time, right? So you will just you will get access just to see the credentials most of the times, right? So if you are not a senior engineer, even you don't get access to create a credentials as well here if you go to the real time. Here we are experiencing everything, right? But when you get into the real time, there will be a lot of restrictions. No one will give you the access to do delete or update all these things, right? Just to call out the roles and responsibility. Only the leads or some the senior guys will have the access at a credential level to update the secrets and all. Okay. So the Sonar is done. Now let me specify the JFrog credentials, right? So the JFrog admin is my username and I have the password with me. Add credential, username and password. JFrog admin is the JFrog username. Let me give the password. This is JFrog. These are JFrog credentials. Click on create. Done. Now let me give the Docker credentials. I have the password with me here. Let me add a credential. Username is dpt hub. Let me give the password. The ID can be Docker. These are Docker logins. Click on create. With that, I think all the required credentials that would be needed as part of my pipeline planning are added there. The next thing is we need to set up the tools. Like how would the Jenkins know that what is the Sonar URL, what is the JFrog URL, where the Java is available, something like that, right? Let me do them now. First, let me do the JFrog. If I go back to the manage Jenkins one more time, and here you can see the system and the tools concept. Probably I need to go to tools. Probably I need to go to systems, I believe. Again, based on the Jenkins latest version, the UI will be keep changing, guys. So here, let me search for JFrog. Control F, JFrog. You see here, because the JFrog, I meant to say the Artifactory plugin is installed some time back, you are able to see all these options here. If the plugin is not installed, you will not see these settings at all, guys. Now you should understand what is the use of the plugin. The plugin will add the feature, right, for your Jenkins. Now here I need to add the JFrog instance, like which is the JFrog URL it has to use for connecting. So let me give the JFrog URL there. In my case, this is the URL that I need to use to connect it to my JFrog account, right? And this is JFrog instance ID. I wanted to connect it to this JFrog using the credential plugin because the credentials were already added some time back, right? So here I can select the credentials from the drop down, right? So I can say that, hey, use the JFrog credentials that were already added in the credentials tab and connect to this particular JFrog URL. That's how I'm telling the or setting up or configuring the JFrog tool here. Done. If you want, to can verify the connection as well by clicking on test connection. It will just verify that if it is able to connect to this JFrog URL using these credentials or not. Look like it is all good. Apply the settings, save the settings. Right now, similarly, I need to set up the Sonar as well. How it can connect it to the Sonar, right? So let me search for Sonar here. Because the Sonar plugin is installed, you are able to see this Sonar related options. Add Sonar queue. This is the Sonar. This is just the name of the tool. And here you need to give the server URL, right? So sonarcloud.io is the URL, right? In order to connect it to the Sonar Cloud, just give it over there. And the credentials can be used from the existing credential store and select the Sonar credentials from the drop down. You are done with this. Click on apply, save, right? Now, from the tool perspective, the Sonar JFrog is done. So let me see the Java as well. Okay. If I go to manage Jenkins one more time, and if I go to the tools concept here, so here you can see the JDK installation section. That is where you need to add the JDK. In the sense, the Java is currently installed in which location. You just need to call out that. Okay. So tell me guys one thing. So the Java would be needed on the master server or in the a slave pod. The Java would be needed in the master Jenkins pod or in the slave Jenkins pod in general. It should be in the slave, right? Because that is where my actual Maven build commands will be getting executed, correct? But I'm setting up all these configurations in the master so that the master know the total configuration. It can delegate this information to the slave whenever the slave comes in and the tasks are being executed, right? So being said that, here I have the Docker file which I have used to create a container image that we can use it for the Jenkins agent pod, right? So here I have, right here I have installed the Java into this specific folder. So in which folder the Java was set up as part of this image, I'm just using the same here as well. That way, right? That way, I think Java, right? The Jenkins will now aware of that the Java software is currently available on so and so folder on your Jenkins slave pod whenever it comes up later. As of now, I'm just setting up the things here. So apply, save. Now, if I look into the planning here, right, all the tools are done. The next thing is, yeah, looks all good. The next thing is prepare the required Docker file and the Helm charts for your source code, correct? So now let me ask my developer, hey developer, tell me which code that you want me to set up the pipeline for the build and deployment, right? So let me get the source code from the developer now. The Java login app that I have used before for showing you how the Java builds will happen using the Maven build and all, that sample Java login app will be supported for Java 8 only. But your Sonar is expecting Java 11. Remember guys, we got the same issue, right? Because the Sonar is supported for Java 11, and the Java login app that we have used for testing or for demonstrating is supported for Java 8 only. Of course, the developer has to give us the supported code, right? Hence the reason today I'm not using that Java login app code. I'm using the different code. But will that be a matter for you guys as a DevOps engineer, which code or which application that you are using for the build and deployment? Not really, right? Whatever the code it is, whatever the application it is, without you worrying about the functionality of the application, take the code, just give it to Jenkins and build it and deploy it. You are done, right? So today I'm using the Java code. I think I should not use a terminology called Java, which is a um, you know uh, which is very high level. So probably I'll use the framework name like a Spring Boot. Okay, I have the Spring Boot framework code with me, and let me show you how to do that here. I think EOS microservices admin hyphen source. This is the repository where I have the Java source code. Sorry, Spring Boot code. Uh, yes. So let me clone this repository now just to show you what all things are available in this repository, like what kind of the files are available here. I'm just cloning the repository here. Done. Now let me see in this repository what is available. Okay. So in general, the sorry, this one, right? Right. If you look into this repository, as usual, you can see the SRC folder. Inside the SRC, there is a main folder, Java folder, and you can see some Java application is available here, which is the plain text formatted Java code. Looks good, correct? And you can see a pom.xml file here where the developer is already mentioned, right? How the dependencies can be managed in this pom.xml file. Looks good. And somewhere you can see the name of the artifact, the version of the artifact, right? And all these different things looks good. And the location where the artifact has to be get published it into the JFrog, the folder structure, right? Everything is mentioned. So I'm just calling out the structure here, right? But it's up to the developer how they wanted to all these things, right? This code works for the Java 11, looks good, right? And yes, it has the Sonar related information here, right? You see this? So let me copy this Sonar information, guys. We did this all manually, right? Before? So no, guys. Now I'm just trying to put them it into the automation. So this is my Sonar. I think my token is same 9B ending with 9B. Let me verify the token one more time. Not really. Let me try to update the token one more time, guys. So I'll just go to manage Jenkins. I'll go to credentials tab. I'll go to Sonar credentials, update the credentials, change the password. Let me give the latest token over there. Click on save. Good. Now let me come back to Sonar. This is my organization name. Is it the same here already? Let me go to pom.xml file. Yeah, it's the same. So looks the configuration is all up to date. Right now, I don't need to worry about the rest of the the pom.xml file, which is pretty much taken care by the developer, right? Good. And Now this is what I'm trying to talk about, guys. If you look into this Spring Boot application code, right, it has a file called mvn here. What is mvn? Mvn is the Maven, right? So when it comes to the Spring Boot, the developer itself is giving you the required Maven software or Maven packages as part of the repository itself, guys. You see here mvnw. This mvnw is actually a Maven package, or I would say Maven software itself. So that means you don't need to install the Maven separately. The Maven software is came or available as part of the repository itself, guys. If you wanted to build this source code, it's just matter of running this mvn w command, like how you run mvn package command or mvn deploy command. Now you need to run mvn w package, mvn w deploy. That is the command that you need to run. Following me? The mvn is just, in general, how will you set up the mvn, guys? You download the Maven zip package, you extract the zip. When you extract the zip package, you will get a mvn binary, right, which you can execute it, correct? The same mvn software, whatever is needed to build the project, is available as part of the repository itself. The developer is already added this for you. So you don't need to install the Maven separately in your local machine or wherever you are actually planning for the build process. So the Maven that is came along with the repository, this Maven is called as a embedded Maven. The terminology embedded Maven in the sense that is the Maven that is came as part of the repository. You just use the same Maven and run the commands and go for the build process. You don't need to install the Maven separately. Are we good with this? Yes, I hope you are able to hear me now. Thank you. Now coming back to this, right? So I was saying like the embedded Maven is the Maven software that you get it as part of the repository, which you don't need to install separately, right? So that's how the Spring Boot applications will come along with the Maven. The developer will give you this, right, Maven software for you. Now, if you are getting the embedded Maven, you will get a mvnw file, mvnw.cmd file, and you will get a .mvn folder. All these things are actually your Maven software, right, which you are downloading as part of the repository itself, right, which is just avoiding the unnecessary step that you need to install on your build systems wherever you are actually building the project. Now, so once you get the source code, right, I have the Maven that is well and good for me to do the build. So once you do the build process, I'm now curious to know the output will be a war file or jar file. Where do you see that information, guys? In the pom.xml file, in general, you can see here, right? So the output will be a war file or a jar file. So if it is not mentioned, then it will be creating the jar file for you by default. So in this case, you see the developer is not mentioning that what type of the file will be get created. So by default, it creates the jar file only for you. And most of the times, definitely 100%, right? All the Java projects that you are building in will be a jar file only. Agree with me, guys? Do you think you get a war file for any reason in real time? No, right? Because all the Java code are actually a backend applications which are not directly giving any web interface. So definitely the type will be a jar only. Now you know the name of the file, right? In general, the name of the artifact will be either the version is so. It will be a .jar file. That file will be created. Any cases where the file will be get created when you do this Java build? If you do the build process, right, the artifact will be created under the target folder. You need to visualize the you know the manual steps that I have executed previously, right? That's the reason I have shown you all those. So by default, it creates that artifact file it in the target folder. You need to collect the target folder, or the artifact file, and use it in your Tomcat wherever you wanted to run the application, correct? Now, so once you get a the artifact file, right? In this case, let's say I have got a jar file. If you build this project, you'll get a jar file. That is the jar file that I need to include it in your container image, correct? Because my goal is not to run a application on the EC2 directly, right? My goal is to run this in a container format. So for that, I need to create a image out of it, correct? So now it's your DevOps engineer responsibility to add a Docker file in your repository wherever the source code is provided by the developer. In the Docker file, you need to compose your Docker layers, how you are expecting, or how your image to be prepared, the custom image. Whenever you get a jar type of the artifact, in order to run the artifact, in order to run that application, all what you need to run is java-jar and specify the jar file that is got created. This is the command that you need to run in order to start the application. Where this file is available, guys, the jar file is available it in the target folder, right? All what I am doing is the files that are getting created in the target folder, all the files, that file I'm just copying it here with your own naming convention, because I just don't want all this release and all. I just copy it like this. It's kind of adding this file. Then whatever the jar file that you got it, you just need to execute the jar file, and this is the command that you need to run to execute the jar file and start the application, guys. To right to execute the jar file or to run the jar file, you just need a JDK, like the Java software will be needed on this. Hence, I'm using the JDK image here, which is giving you the Java 11 for you. And on that Java 11 base image, I'm just executing the jar file, whatever is getting prepared as part of the Maven build. Now you may be questioning me now, right? Where is the Tomcat? In our previous lectures, I have shown you that once you get an artifact file, the artifact file has to be get copied it into the Tomcat server. In the Tomcat, it has to be in the web apps folder. Agree with me? Correct? But now when it comes to this backend, right? Previously, I have shown you the Tomcat because I was using the war file. I wanted to explain how the concept work. But when it comes to the Spring Boot application, which is being developed as a backend application, right? The Spring Boot code, the Spring Boot application itself, the Java code itself will give you the embedded Tomcat. Of course, I can't show you exactly where it is available. Probably I can show you here. Maybe in the pom.xml file, the developer might have been added the dependencies for Tomcat as well somewhere. Maybe somewhere. That's okay. It's not related to our thing. This is developer stuff. So what I'm saying, right? The Spring Boot code, whatever the developer has added, written, right? That includes the embedded Maven and the embedded Tomcat as well. So literally, you don't need to install the Maven for building process, and even for running the application, you don't need to install the Tomcat also. Whatever the jar file that is created, right, that jar file itself has the embedded embedded Tomcat inside it. Are we good with this? So all what you need to do is just execute the jar file. It automatically take care of extracting the Tomcat software, automatically putting your code base it into a respective target folders, and the application will be get started. Everything will happen with just running the jar. You don't need to install the Tomcat explicitly. Hence the reason my Docker file is so simple, right? It's just matter of taking the artifact and just execute the artifact by running a Java jar command. That's it. Because it has the embedded Tomcat inside the jar file itself, because that is the behavior of the Spring Boot code, and the developer is including all of them inside only. Previous lecture, I have shown you the Tomcat by installing manually because you should understand that the Java applications will be running inside a Tomcat only. But now that step is eliminated because you don't need to install the Tomcat. The Tomcat is available as part of the jar file only, which is the embedded Tomcat that we call it out. So far so good. With that, the step number 5 is completed, right? I would say the step number 4 is done, setting up the Jenkins, and the step number 5 is also done, which is preparing the Docker file, which will be used, which will be using, which my Jenkins has to use to create a Docker image for your application. In that Docker image, I'm just including my jar file and giving the entry point or CMD to start the application. Now the next thing is, once you have the image ready with you, right, that image has to be included in your Helm chart, correct? Now in this repository itself, your responsibility to keep the Helm charts here. You have the charts folder. Inside the charts folder, let's say this is the Helm chart name, right? The chart.yaml has the chart version and the chart name, and you see the templates folder. In the templates folder, now I have the deployment file. This is the deployment manifest file, how we are expecting the application to be get deployed, right? And here the replica count is actually variabilized. This value will be coming from the values.yaml, right? And you see the image, which image that it has to use. Even the image is coming from the values.yaml. So that way you have the control which image that you need to use. And here my application, the Java application that I'm using here, right, is listening on port number 8090, not on 8080. 8080 is the default port usually for any Java applications, but it's up to the developer again. If the developer wanted to use a different port number, they can overwrite it. So the developer has to tell you that their application is listening on which port number. Which port number the developer is saying, so you just need to use the same port number here as well, right? This is for the liveness and readiness probes and some sort of resources. So we are already familiar how to prepare a Helm chart. I'm just calling out that this is my generic Helm chart, which has a service as well in order to access my application uh, from the cluster IP. I have the ingress as well here, which will be which will be like accessing this application from outside world. So here you see the host. I'm not hard coded. This is coming from the values file again, and it has to be routing the routing the traffic to a zone service. Whatever the name that I given here, the same name I'm just mentioning in my ingress as well, right? Looks good. So this is the simple Helm chart definitions that I have, and it's there in my repository itself. With that, I would say that my repository is fully complete, right? It has a Spring Boot application code, it has a embedded Maven, it has a embedded Tomcat as part of the build, right? And it has a Docker file to run your application, and it has a Helm chart definitions in order to prepare a Helm chart. Pretty much all the all the build related dependency configuration is available in this repository, correct? Now, if you give this repository to the Jenkins will start using these files one by one as per the need, and will be running the commands for you automatically. So being said that, now the 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 step number 6 is also done, like how the Helm charts are ready with over there. If you see this Helm chart, guys, I don't have a values.yaml here, just to give you the clarity that in general, you don't need to keep the values as part of the chart, right? The values will come later at the time of doing the deployment. Of course, if you want, we can use the values here as well, which is the default. If you don't give the values outside, it use the default. If you give, it overwrites. I'm done with this step. Now the next step is start doing the CI pipeline, right? Now everything is ready. Now you go and inform to Jenkins that, hey Jenkins, this is the Bitbucket repository where I have the source code and all the required files are there, and required plugins, required passwords, everything is there. Can you take the code and follow my build process? Now, how to create a pipeline code? So the pipeline is the automation script that you need to create, right? And the pipeline script can be created or can be written in different ways. Probably I'll just go here. Right? So the Jenkins pipeline is just a automation uh, script which is taking care of executing all the required stages to complete your build process. Right? The pipeline script can be written in two ways. One is the declarative syntax, the other one is the scripted syntax. Declarative syntax is way easy to write it. The syntax will be easy, right? But the scripted pipeline is little way harder, right? And uh, the scripted pipeline will be used. I'm going to say Groovy is the programming language that we need to use here to write this pipeline code, right? So you don't need to learn the Groovy language. Groovy language as close to the Java language only. So as we are not a developers, right? You don't need to learn the Groovy language, but it's better to know that Groovy is the language that are used here to write a scripted pipelines. In general, to write a scripted pipelines, the organizations are hiring the developers only, not as a DevOps engineer, because I'm sure the 70% of the DevOps engineers are not familiar how to write a scripted pipelines because it is expecting the Groovy language. So the actual Java developers will be using the Groovy because they are familiar about the development, right? They will be writing the scripted pipelines as well for you. But there are certain cases where the interviewers may ask you that, hey, do you know Groovy? Do you know how to write a scripted pipeline? Just to check your familiarity about the pipeline. But as long as you are able to understand the pipeline, how that is there, it is good enough. You don't need to, learn the Groovy to write a pipeline from a scratch, just to give you some heads up. Most of the requirements can easily be done by the declarative as well, which is very simple to write a script. But yeah, if any a complexity, then the people will choose the scripted pipelines. Okay, so either you go with a declarative method or you go with the scripted method to keep your automation. That automation code, that pipeline code should be there in a file called Jenkins file. Jenkins file is the name of the file that you need to use to keep your code. The name of the file is Jenkins file. Always J should be a uppercase. Then only it will be identified so easily. Of course, if you want, you can use any other name as well. But this is the best practice to use the file name. So all what you need to do is in the same repository, you need to have a one more file called Jenkins file. You see here, Jenkins file. So you need to create a Jenkins file in the same repository. In this Jenkins file, now you need to keep your pipeline automation script. This is the pipeline code, guys. I have close to 135 number of lines of code is available here, which is the pipeline now. But don't worry how the code is written here. But for now, I'm skipping some lines, don't worry. If you look at this pipeline code, right, at a high level, I'm telling to Jenkins that, hey Jenkins, in my Jenkins file, which is the pipeline code, there are a couple of stages are there. Can you please execute all of these stages? So here you can see this is called as a stage number 1, the first stage, right? The Jenkins pipeline code is all divided it into number of stages, guys. Okay, so each stage is starts with a stage, and in the bracket you need to tell the stage name, and in the curly bracket you need to tell what exactly needs to be done on this particular stage. Let's say the first stage is checkout SCM, that is where it has to clone the Bitbucket repository and do the Docker build. And the second stage is about doing the Sonar scan. The next stage is all about setting up the JFrog Artifactory configuration. The next stage is all about right, deploying the artifacts to the JFrog. The next stage is all about right, pushing your build artifact information to the JFrog. Next stage is all about doing the Docker build. Next stage is all about right, creating the Helm charts. The why it is repeated, guys? That's okay. Forget about it. Right? So with this, your Helm charts are created and your Helm charts are getting publishing to the JFrog Artifactory. That's it. So what are all different steps that you are expecting to be done? You divide all of these steps it into a number of stages and you compose your pipeline code as stage by stage, guys. Now, when you are writing the code as stage by stage, right? Let's say the first stage is cloning the code from the repository, right? Inside the bracket, now we need to tell how it has to clone the source code. Now you see the syntax like git credential ID and git URL colon something something. How do I know that? How do I know that this is the syntax that I need to use in order to tell that at a high level, right? The line number 20 line telling that, right, the code has to be cloned from this Bitbucket repository, right? This is the repository where the source code is there, and it has to clone from the master branch. Let me see, guys. Is it the master branch or the main branch now? It is master branch. Okay, could be this repository created long back. So I'm telling that, right, from which branch the code has to be cloned and what is the repository name. And you see here the credential ID, like which credentials that it has to use to clone this repository. Remember, guys, some time back I have added my Bitbucket credentials in the Jenkins with the ID called git, right? I'm referring I'm referencing that name here so that the Jenkins will use that username and password and will use this URL and will be cloning the code from the master branch. But why the syntax is like this? How do I know that this is how I need to put a syntax? Correct. So this is not a groovy language, guys. Okay. So remember we have a plugins, right? Like git is the plugin, right, that we are using here to use the Bitbucket related integration, right? All what you need to do is go to the git plugin documentation and read the plugin documentation to know how to use the plugin, how to put a syntax right in your pipeline code. Nothing that you are putting your effort in terms of thinking here. It's just matter of going to the plugin documentation. So Git is the plugin which is installed as part of the default plugin setup. So this plugin documentation will tell you exactly how you need to use the syntax in order to specify from where the source code has to be cloned. And you see the syntax here. This is the repository name, which branch, all the details. If you do little scroll down, right, there are multiple different ways are there how we can set up the things. You see here, Git, credential ID, specify the ID where the passwords are there, URL colon, then the URL. Yes, I just have copied this statement and I just put it here. No other things. Getting me now? That means for every stage or for every tool that we are using the integration here, there is a plugin. Plugin has a documentation and we need to spend some time in going to that documentation and see how we can fill up this things here. That's it. The line number 29 is all about cloning the source code repository. Then the next thing is, sorry. Yeah. The next thing is I need to run the Maven build, correct? Hope you are following me. What is the next step, guys? Once you clone the source code, the next step is we need to do the build, right? Maven build. And you see the build command here, mvnw clean package. Now, can you understand why I'm using mvnw? mvnw is the embedded Maven, right? This command is available as part of the repository. When you clone this repository, you will get this file. And I'm just running this command. So whenever you are giving the command that you are expecting it to run, you need to give sh, that means shell, and give the command that you are expecting it to run. Now tell me, this particular command should be run in where? Is it this command should run in Jenkins master or in Jenkins slave? Let's say if it is in Jenkins slave, in the Jenkins slave, it should run in a pod level or at a container level. The command should run at a pod level or a container level. Do you think any commands will be executed at pod level? No, right? Pod is just a abstracted layer that the Kubernetes is using, right? At the end of the day, everything has to be get executed inside a container only, right? So this is the syntax. Container of, you need to tell exactly in which container the below commands has to be get executed. How do you know the container? Or how do you know the container name? Correct? If you do little scroll up now, this is where the pod template definition is there. This pod template is exactly like your Kubernetes manifest file only. This Kubernetes manifest file is telling exactly how it can create a slave pod. You see API version is v1, kind is pod, and you see here the image, and I'm telling that, hey, take the image dpt10 Jenkins agent, right? This is the image that is got published into registries. So I'm telling that, hey, you use this Jenkins agent image to create a slave pod. The container name will be build, right? And use on labels. The kind is pod. So pretty much at a high level, right? The pod template is having some definition how it can create a slave pod and which image that it has to use to create a slave pod. What will be the container name in the slave pod? Use that information and just mention it in your below pipeline code. That's it. How do you know the syntax again? How to put this pod template and all? The pod template syntax is a part of your Kubernetes plugin. Remember, we actually installed one Kubernetes plugin, right? So the Kubernetes plugin documentation now will give you the details, how to write a pod template, syntax, all these things, right? So go to the Kubernetes plugin documentation, right? And look for the pod template here and just copy the syntax and just put some, like change some names as per your requirement. But most of the the steps that you get it from their documentation only, guys. Good with that? So I'm using the pod template and I'm just mentioning that in which container the commands has to be executed. That's how the syntaxes work. So the stage one is done, which is all about taking the code and doing the Maven build. Now, if we come to the next stage, it's again, right, the Sonar related. You see, I'm using something called with the Sonar Cube env. How do I know this information again? We install the Sonar plugin, right, in order to integrate with the Sonar. So Sonar plugin. So just go to the Sonar plugin documentation and read this, and you will get this information. So this is the syntax that we need to put it in your pipeline code in order to specify how the Sonar cube has to be, invoked. So just copy this exactly, right, and keep it in your pipeline, guys. And I'm just doing the same thing. So inside the bracket, like this is your Sonar tool name. Like I added the Sonar tool in the Jenkins, right? Sometime back, I'm just using the name here. It know that now which Sonar URL that it has to connect the credentials. It pick up everything from there. And which command that it has to run. You see, this is the command that it has to run. And we executed this command manually, right? Previously, same thing like that. So I think in our case, it should be this command, right? Copy this command. This is not MVN, this is MVNW, which is the embedded Maven. I'm done with my next stage. So the expectation is if you look into the pipeline, you should be able to understand what is this stage mean and what commands that it is executing. You don't need to be expertise in writing the pipeline from very scratch, guys, because if you look at this, right, most of the effort that are understanding the plugin documentation, copy the syntax and do little tweaking over there. If you know that process, you are good. And again, writing the pipeline is one-time job. Let's say today I'm spending some time to prepare this pipeline code. Tomorrow, let's say I need to do it for a different Java application. Do I need to spend time again, guys? No, right? The same pipeline code works for the other application as well, right? Just matter of changing some names and all. So most likely the pipelines were already there, which you need to reuse them and do little tweakings, change some names. And if you know that kind of the skill, it's perfectly good. It's not mean that we should not learn it, but yeah. So at this current stage, right, if you are able to read through, that is good enough. Now in the same way, so if I go to the artifact, right, again you get into the documentation only. So I'll just pull some information for you. Okay, so if you look into the artifact plugin, right, it has the details how exactly you can go with this, how to use these functions and how to put the values, all these details, guys. And I just simply copy it from there and just paste it here and replace the values as per your requirement. That's it. So probably in our case, this is cm fax, that is my jfrog URL. Do I have the repository, guys? Let me see what is my repository name. So it is ed hyphen. So let me give ed hyphen lips release local. So this is my repository name, ed hyphen lips release. This is my my virtual repository name. That's it. I'm done with this. So basically, like from which repo to which repo it has to deploy the artifact. from which repo it has to resolve the artifact. And this is the basic syntax that we need to use and just replace the values for there. So here I'm actually deploying the artifacts, right? So I'm telling that, hey, you use the Java tool, which you already set up in the Jenkins. Use the embedded Maven. That's what I'm saying true. And take the pom.xml file and just do the installation process. Installation in the sense, the Maven install is the command which is actually uploading the artifacts to the JFrog. This is the basic syntax that you get it from your plugin documentation again. That's it, guys. Now just follow this as it is. Maybe if you go to the Docker build, same thing like docker dot with registry, that is the documentation suggest, and get the syntax from there and you specify the details here. So what is the credential ID to get the username and password, and just specify that. And this is your Docker image name. What will be your Docker image name? And this syntax will take care of building the Docker image and uploading the Docker image to the Docker registry. So everything will happen here. You will get this from Docker pipeline plugin documentation only. Right. The next thing is Helm chart. Right. So this is where you see, right, I'm just running the Helm commands. Helm package. This is the command to create a Helm chart. Helm push in order to push the Helm chart to the repository. Maybe in our case, cmfax.jfrog.io. Do you have the Helm repository with me? I don't have Helm repository, right? Let me create one. EOS something. I'll go to here, quick repository creation. I wanted to create a Helm repository, prefix with ed. Done. Okay. Now let me change here. My repository name is ed-helm-local. Done. So with this, the Helm charts are there in the Bitbucket repository, sorry, in the JFrog artifactory. So the CI pipeline is completed, guys. Now, a question for you at this time. Once the build is successful, let's say you have the Helm chart ready, right? You want me to, you want the Jenkins to deploy that it into dev, QA, perf, and prod automatically? No, right? Definitely no. How will you, how are you expecting the Jenkins is deploying this application into dev, QA, perf, and prod automatically? No. So it has to deploy to dev at least, and then the developer has to, right, access the application, verify it. They may take at least 1 day to, 1 day or 2 days to confirm that everything is works good. Once they say okay, then you need to deploy to QA, and the QA team will come and do the testing. They take another 1 hour day. Once they confirm, then it has to go to perf. Once they confirm, then to go to the production. Agree with me? That means, in general, from the time when it is deployed it into the dev, right, it takes at least 2 weeks of time to go to the production. We can't deploy just like that in all the environments at one go, right? At least deploying into dev is accepted. The moment when the code is ready, deploy to dev immediately. Let the developers will verify it. But QA, perf, and prod definitely will not happen at the same time. That will be taken later, and one at a time whenever you are ready for the validation, all these things, guys. So if you are expecting the dev deployment to be done automatically once the build is successful, we can start putting the few more stages for the deployment. You see, I have the the few other stages here. These stages will be for deploying it into the dev environment. Only dev. QA and other things you take care of later. Sometimes, even for dev, the people will not happy. They will just build it, and whenever you are ready, you go and deploy it into the dev and towards the production. It's up to you how you want it to tweak, because this is just matter of adding the stages, nothing much. Even if you add a stage for QA deployment, it will be taken care of. It will deploy. But in general, will not go for the automated deployment it into all the environment just like that, right? Because we need to do the valid well team. So I hope you are able to hear me. Uh, Remove these deployment steps. I'll just make it only CI pipeline, right? So it should be here. Okay. Now my CI pipeline is ready. I'll just push this to my repository back. I made a couple of changes, right? So EOS hyphen microservices, it is under Jenkins, right? EOS hyphen microservices admin source, git add, git commit, git config, user dot email, git config, user dot name. Let me push this code. Git push origin master. Right. So I have the repository ready now with all the required data. Why the git push is taking long time here? Well, while it is happening, right? Yeah, it is asking for the credentials. Let me supply the credentials. Well, so I have the code ready and all the config ready in my Bitbucket repository. What will be the next step, guys? In my planning, my CI pipeline is ready, right? Now the next step is go to the Jenkins, correct? Now you tell to Jenkins that, hey Jenkins, there is a Bitbucket repository where the source code and all the required files are there. Can you go and get that and please go with the CI process, correct? So before I do that, there is one other step that is pending. In the Jenkins, in the manage Jenkins, right? You need to go to this cloud concept. Just go to this cloud concept. Oh my God. Yeah. You need to go to the cloud concept and just create a new cloud, right? And give the name here. Let's say this is for slave. A cloud or the slave kind of same, guys. Okay. uh, they have a naming convention called cloud, just because the slave pods are get GoToMeeting is not liking this Jenkins CI process, it seems. That's the reason it is keep on going for know the audio issues. Of course, you also not liking this because of the complexity that we see in the pipeline, right? But don't worry, if you know what is pipeline, how the stages will be there, that is good enough for you guys at this time. Well, you see here the type as Kubernetes. Basically, what I'm telling here, right? Hey Kubernetes, sorry, hey Jenkins, can you use this Kubernetes plugin and use the dynamic agent concept? Like that means whenever the build is required, you go and create a slave pod. Whenever uh, the build is done, automatically the pod will be terminated. That you need to tell to Jenkins. How will you tell? You go to the manage Jenkins cloud concept, right? And you select the type as Kubernetes and just click on create. And here you need to specify which Kubernetes server that it has to use to create a slave pod. Getting me, guys? The reason why I'm doing this, because in the Jenkins file, you only said that use so and so image for creating the Jenkins slave pod, right? But the Jenkins slave pod has to be created in which Kubernetes cluster? Getting me? Right? That is something that I'm informing here. This is where you need to tell the Kubernetes API server endpoint. Then then the Jenkins will connect it to this API server endpoint and will start creating the slave pod over there and will start executing the steps for you. Now tell me guys one thing. The Jenkins pod currently running in the Kubernetes cluster, right? And I'm expecting the slave pod to be created in the same cluster, correct? It is possible. Let's say the Jenkins master pod is running in one cluster. The Jenkins slave pod can be created in the different cluster as well, possible. That is the reason it is asking for the Kubernetes URL. If you are expecting the slave to be created in the different Kubernetes cluster, right? If you're expecting the slave to be created in the different cluster, you need to specify that different cluster endpoint, all this. But if you're expecting the slave to be created in the same cluster where the master is there, then you don't need to specify any of this. You can just simply make it as blank. Just go and click on test connection. You see, it is able to connect it to the Kubernetes API server because it is connecting to the same cluster where the master pod is running, because there is a service account already. It is using the service account now to connect to the Kubernetes API server. This all looks good. So here we need to give the Jenkins URL. What is the Jenkins URL, right? How the Jenkins will be connected? I mean to say the slave to be, when the slave pod is created, the slave pod has to connect with the master, right? So I need to give the details here, how the slave can connect with the master. http:// how the Jenkins will be accessible, any clue? How the Jenkins master can be accessible. UI is for our purpose, right? The Jenkins UI, let's say uh, this one, this is the URL, right? This is for the administrator purpose. The slave has to connect with the master. The slave will not use this URL. Hope you are getting me right. This is for our purpose to logging into the website, Jenkins as administrator. If the slave is connecting to master, can I say the slave pod, master pod, both are running in the same cluster? If if both are running in the same cluster, can I say that the communication will happen via the cluster IP? If yes, then what is the name of the cluster IP service of your Jenkins? So when you deploy the Jenkins master, you have the cluster IP service, right? The cluster IP service name is what? The cluster IP service name is Jenkins here. So you can give that here. HTTP colon slash slash the cluster IP service name of your Jenkins colon the port number that it has to use. So simple, right? Of course, if you want, you can give this also like jenkins.shopper.com. No problem, it should work. But why the slave part to go via the internet to connect to master? Getting me? Rather, it can use the a cluster IP service name and can connect to the master internally within the Kubernetes only. That's the idea here. And the tunnel is about your JNLP port. You need to specify Jenkins colon 50,000 port. That is your tunnel port. Done. Now in the pod here, you need to tell the labels. In general, in the Jenkins file, right? I'm using the labels as name and the value is build. This is the pod template, right? So just specify the same here. Name, build, save, done. Yes, one pod can connect it to another pod using the cluster IP service name itself. The cluster IP service name is enough to connect it to the other pod. I'm done, guys. Maybe I'll take another 5 minutes of your time today. The final step is go to Jenkins, click on this new item. The new item will start creating the pipeline job for you. Pipeline job in the sense now you need to tell to Jenkins that go and execute the steps, right? Which is called as a job. Now I'm creating a job. My job name is CI. Maybe I'll say CI pipeline. That's okay. I'll say I have the I can see I think I can do a build. So this is the build pipeline I'm creating, and here there are different ways how we can create it, and I wanted to use the pipeline method. Click on OK. So don't worry about too much information here. I just simply go to the section here. So where the pipeline code is available. If you want the entire pipeline code that you have written here, right? The entire pipeline code you can copy paste here. It should work. Or basically at the end of the day, the Jenkins would need this pipeline code only, right? Because the code has everything what needs to be done. Either you give the code here or you go here, select pipeline from SCM, then tell that the pipeline code is available in the Git repository. Then specify your repository information, where exactly the pipeline code is there. In my case, the pipeline code is available in this repository, right? I just push the code as well. So just specify the repository URL. So this is a repository where my Jenkins file script is there, right? So specify that this is the repository where the code is available. Use the Bitbucket credentials to authenticate this Bitbucket. In this Bitbucket repository, in the master branch, there is a Jenkins file. Use that Jenkins file and execute the Jenkins file. That is the meaning of this whole process here. Now I'm just telling to Jenkins that go to this repo, go to master branch, take the Jenkins file, execute the Jenkins file. As part of the Jenkins file, it has all the stages, right? It will start doing all of them. Done. Now, if you go to the dashboard, this is the job that I created. This job has the details about where is the Jenkins file in, or in which repository the Jenkins file is there. That information is there here, right? All what you need to do is just click on build now. If you click on build now, now the Jenkins will go to this repository and will get the Jenkins file and it will start executing the Jenkins file. You see here it is doing something. Probably here, if I run kubectl get pods just to see what pods are there, kubectl get pods. Currently only Jenkins master is running. Okay, looks good. I will wait for some time. Oh, it's taking long time. We can click on that and click on console output to see what's happening. You see what's happening, guys? The job is started with the admin user, and you see it is waiting for the slave pod. We'll wait for some time. You see here, start of a pipeline. What is doing, guys? It is currently executing the pod template, you see. And before that, you see obtained a Jenkins file from Git. It is actually downloaded the Jenkins file from this repository. In the Jenkins file, now it is executing the pod template script. As part of the pod template script, it has to create a slave pod now. Once the slave pod is created, then in that slave pod, it starts executing all the different stages that you have been talked about. Make sense? Okay, so we'll wait for some time. If it is works, okay. If not works, okay. We'll continue this tomorrow as well. The expectation is now it has to come up with a slave pod. Sorry, currently only master, right? It has to create a one more slave pod for me automatically. On that slave pod, the job should execute. If our configuration is have any issues, obviously it will throw some error after some time. Based on the error, we need to see what is that is missing. That is our CI pipeline, guys. Maybe it is taking some time. So any questions, do let me know. So once you struggle this much, right, once the pipeline is ready, the next time when the code is committed to the repository, you don't need to do anything. The Jenkins will take care of doing this whole build stages for you automatically because you kept everything in the Jenkins file, right? It's just matter of executing the Jenkins file. That's how the benefit that you are getting in. Any questions, do let me know, or else we are good for today. So I just need to wait for some time. So I'll show this tomorrow as well anyway. So probably if it is not working, it will try to create a slave pod a couple of times. Still, if it not, it will throw some error. Probably it is not able to connect it to the, or maybe some plugin misconfiguration, whatever, if it is not working. Anyway, based on the error, we'll come to know what's happening. Looks good, right? Much excited here. The created the pod, and I can see that the slave pod is created. Looks good. It took some time, but it created. If you go here and run a kubectl get pods, you see here, guys, there is a pod created automatically for you. The pod name is build hyphen something, and it is still in the process of a creation process. This is what I'm saying about the slave pod. Right now, all the stages that you mentioned in the Jenkins file, right, all the commands, all the steps will be get executed in this particular slave pod, which is just created. Once the steps are completed, once the Helm chart is ready, pushing to the JFrog, right, then this slave pod will be get terminated automatically. Let's see what's happening. You see, it is clearly telling that it created a pod, right, and this is the configuration that it has used to create a pod, right. And once the pod is created, then you see that it is actually started executing your stages. And you see here it is actually cloning your Bitbucket repository to get the source code. Then you see that it is actually running the mbn clean package command to do the Maven build. Now you see that it is doing the Maven build process. This is all part of your Maven build. You know, right? The Maven will download some dependencies all from repositories. A lot of output here, right? Once the Maven build is done, you see that it is now doing something with the Sonar. The next stage is Sonar, right? So in the Sonar, it is failed. So there is some issue why it is failing at the Sonar. So it's saying that same issue, the Java does not support Java 11. Why the, anyway, this is something that I need to look at. Look like there is a version incompatibility. It is not happy with the Java 11. So probably we need to spend some time in looking into the Sonar documentation, right? Why the Sonar is not happy with the Java 11. So for now, what I can do, right? Anyway, good thing is pipeline is completed, right, guys? Either it is a success or failure. Either it is a success or failure. Pipeline is completed, right? If you see now the get pods, you see the slave pod is not there now. The slave pod is already terminated because the script is completed. The slave pod is not there now, right? Because the script is completed. That's how the dynamic pods will be created, will be destroyed automatically, right, during the job execution process. Quickly, what I can do, right, I will comment out the Sonar. Maybe I'll remove the Sonar stage for now. I'll remove the Sonar stage. I'll push the changes. Maybe Sonar is not happy with the Java version. Git push origin master. What is my Bitbucket password? We have we have 5 more minutes, right? So I'm just skipping the Sonar for now. It has some version compatibility issues. Now what I do is I made a change, right? I'll just come to my Jenkins build. This is the job name. I'll click on build now. You see here, the first time when I executed the build number is 1. It has given you the overview here. You see the build number 1, how many stages are there, each stage, how much time that it took, in which stage it is failed. Now I'm executing it again. That is the second number. In the second number, you see the progress here. It is started off doing this, the stage number 1. Probably by now, if you come and look for the pods, right? kubectl get pods. You see that the build pod or well guys, I'm just observing here like the slave pod is created automatically. Here you see it is proceeded further, right? After the Maven build, it is going with the JFrog integration. Now it is actually uploading the artifact to the JFrog, the jar files, right? That's the progress that you see. If you wanted to see what's happening exactly, you go to the build number, go to the console output, just scroll here, you will exactly see what's happening, right? It is actually currently integrating with your JFrog. So if at all, if it gets failed, you need to see the log, why it is failed, and start fixing the pipeline issues. So since it is going through, I'll be waiting here, guys. The expectation is finally I should have my artifact, sorry, I should have my Helm chart in my JFrog. That is my final stage. Looks good. It's proceeded further. You see here it is actually uploading the maybe here, right? You see it is logging into the Docker Hub registries. Before that, you see the JFrog integration is done, right? It is logging into the Docker registries. You see it is actually creating the Docker images, just simply running the same command what you usually run manually. Then it is pushing the image to the Docker registries. You see it is actually doing all of this, building the Docker image. It is creating a Docker tag. Then it is pushing to the Docker registries. Once the image is pushed to the Docker registries, then it is running the Helm command, right? Then you see that the Helm package is done. Then it is doing the Helm push command to push this Helm chart to the JFrog. Finally, it is done. Happy? If you go back to the build here, you see this is overall process, guys. You see it went through all these different stages. Finally, the Helm chart is ready. Now, if you go to the JFrog and look into the Helm repo that I just created some time back, ed Helm local, right? You see there is a Helm chart available. And this is the Helm chart that you need for the deployment.